Hey there, this is a Wild Femme episode. And if you're new around here, WILD is about our connection to nature. And it's also an acronym for Women into Living Their Dreams, because I believe that we have to take care of our bodies if we want to really live our one wild life. And with me right now is Christine Garvin, and she is a functional health coach. She's based in Asheville, North Carolina. And she really weaves together her personal health journey, including a fibroid surgery that almost killed her, with her training in functional health and nutrition and hormones. She helps women heal their gut, achieve hormone balance, and she is the host of the podcast, Hormonally Speaking, works with clients all over the world via Zoom, and offers group programs for gut healing and hormone health. So welcome, Christine.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Yes. Now, for those who don't know you, and besides being a functional health coach,
hmm
I'm curious, what do you want to most be known for?
I think at this point, my main focus, as you mentioned in my bio, is, gut health and women's hormones. And a lot of people don't understand that those are so intricately connected. And so, really, a lot of times when it comes to hormone health, we actually need to start with the gut. So in so many ways, I think that the experience that I went through, and then just in working with people over time and recognizing the importance of gut health, that's kind of what I've been starting to be known as, I think, like the gut health girl to go to. So
Yeah.
but then the hormones come along with that too. It's super important for, all women of all ages.
And if there was one thing that you were going to let someone know that they needed to maybe focus on first with gut health, what do you think that would be?
So there's definitely some foundationals that I start off with for everyone. Majority of people, I always love asking, how's your digestion? And people say, oh, it's fine. And then I say, well, how much gas and bloating do you have? And they're like, well, I mean, the normal amount. And I'm like, okay, so let's see what's normal to you.
Yeah.
I mean, what's common, doesn't necessarily make it normal. And
hmm
really, yes, you're going to have gas sometimes, but like having consistent gas throughout the day is not necessary. And it shows us that you're not breaking down your foods properly. And so you're not absorbing and getting all the nutrients from those foods that you can. And it's also an indication that there's usually some bacterial component or pathogenic component that are feeding off of that not broken down food.
hmm
So, I always start off with foundations of how is your hydrochloric acid? It's the first thing in your stomach that's going to break down the food. If you have acid reflux, if you have GERD, if you have heartburn, we have to start with healing some of that mucosal lining in your esophagus and in your stomach first. But then we eventually want to introduce hydrochloric acid, because those are actually all indications that your hydrochloric acid is low instead of high. I won't go into the whole explanation about that right now because it's kind of
hmm
long and involved, but just, it's a well-known thing in functional medicine that's not always necessarily the way that allopathic medicine would approach it. So doing the hydrochloric acid, getting that up, so we're breaking down that food properly, so that we are killing off pathogens that come in, because no matter how well you wash your food and everything, like bacteria is going to come in to our bodies, right? It's going to come in via eating, drinking, having our hands near our mouth. It's just the nature of being human. And that hydrochloric acid is the first line of defense to killing
hmm
off those things, so it doesn't have a chance to make it into your small intestine and set up shop and wreak havoc. I also almost always bring in some digestive enzymes, because if your HCl is low, then your pancreatic enzyme, or AKA digestive enzyme output, is probably going to be lower too, because they're intimately connected. I check in with people to see how they're digesting fats. So if you have, for example, greasy stool, which is kind of like, to be a little graphic here, but when it
Oh,
looks a little,
be graphic.
I
I
know
was going
people
to
are
ask
like,
you what about like what is a normal, like what
bowel
does normal
movement.
poop look like? What does
Yeah.
normal bowel movement look like? And
Uh,
just yeah, feel free to talk about that, because as you said, a lot of people think what's normal for them, but or what's common
yeah,
is normal for
is
them, but
normal.
yet
Right.
it's not always the healthiest. So
Right.
yeah.
And poop can tell us a lot, and
Yeah.
this is why I'm always digging into this, no pun intended, with my
Not
clients.
literally, but
I
yes.
know, not literally. Well, some clients will, but that's a whole other story.
There you
Anyways,
go.
so with the greasy stool, if you can imagine kind of a film that sits on the top of the water, that's an indication that you're not absorbing your fats as well as you
Mm,
could be. So, in that case, there's usually something going on with your gallbladder or your liver or both. Really, they're so intimately connected, and bile is produced in your liver, but stored in your gallbladder, and then moves to your small intestine in order to break down and emulsify fats. So that's how we know
makes
that it's
sense.
not, doing so well. So there's supports for that I'll bring in for people. And then, your microbiome. I mean, how is your microbiome doing? Most of us have taken multiple rounds of antibiotics in our lifetime, birth control pills, other medications that all basically impact our gut biome, and diminish our beneficial bacteria and allow sort of for the proliferation of our not so friendly bugs and other things. So we really, there's a particular probiotic that I like a lot, that works really well for about 90% of my clients. So I bring that in usually too. So those are kind of the foundations.
Hmm.
And I would say most people just doing those things are going to like shift things like 70 to 80% in terms of their digestion. And, going into what your stool should look like, there, I'm blanking on the name of it right now. I can only think of Myers Briggs, which is not the name. It's the Bristol stool test.
Oh,
I was
okay.
like, not Myers Briggs. That's a personality thing. Anyways, yes, the
Yeah.
Bristol stool test. You can look that up. You can Google
Hmm.
that, and that's going to show you different types of bowel movements of stool. And what we're shooting for is I think it's level 4. And basically, a nice formed, like as much all in one piece as possible, kind of like a sausage.
Hmm.
That's kind of our like goal, right? If you have more like little like pellets or droppings sort of, then that it indicates that there's more constipation going on. And then obviously on the other side of the spectrum with loose stools, we anywhere from loose to diarrhea.
Hmm.
And that's everything is moving too quickly through your system, so you're not absorbing the nutrients from your food as well when that's
Hmm.
happening consistently.
Yeah, that's good insights.
Yeah.
And when you talked earlier about the liver and
Hmm.
the connection with like more greasy and fatty film that you
Hmm.
might see, or that kind of texture in the stool, like that's probably one connection to the liver,
Hmm.
obviously,
Hmm.
with maybe seeing some issues there. But are there some other ways that we might be able to connect? Well, I see what's going on in the toilet, and how is
Hmm.
that like giving me information about the liver? Of course, there's testing, and I know you can go into a lot of
Hmm.
other things, but is there any patterns that you see with like, if you see this is a connection with liver often, and then can you talk about liver health more and maybe the connection with hormones too?
Absolutely. So there's not really another, connection that I can think of in terms of stool,
Hmm.
how your liver is doing, other than if you are going consistently, like in terms of loose stools and diarrhea,
Hmm.
that really to me is an indication that there is something going on with your liver.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, but so the liver is, I think, I mean, I don't want to say the most important organ, but definitely the workhorse of our body, right?
Hmm.
And it has to detoxify every single thing that we eat, consume, that, we put on our skin, that in the environment has going on in it. And so it is working, nonstop pretty much. And it's estimated that it has 750 processes in the body, right?
Wow.
Yeah. And the thing is, we, live in a pretty toxic environment, like I know that you teach,
Hmm.
right? And because a lot of people were like, well, why doesn't the liver just like, isn't it its job and it just does its thing? And, I always respond, yes, but we also live in a time that we have so many more toxins that we're dealing with on a daily basis. Our food, even organic food now, unfortunately, isn't 100% organic, right? And so you have to think about all those pesticides that are in foods, hormones that are in meats, things like that, all has to be detoxified through our liver. And what a lot of people don't know is our hormones are also detoxified through our liver, because hormones will become toxic, as we know, in terms of like, if you think about breast cancer or any female cancers, they are almost always linked to high estrogen levels. So estrogen in particular becomes toxic in our body if we have too much of it going on, too much of it hanging out, right? But the thing is, say you're drinking alcohol on a daily basis, your liver is going to have to deal with that alcohol first and foremost, because
Mm-hmm.
you're literally going to die from that alcohol if it doesn't detoxify, right? So estrogen gets pushed to the back of the line,
Yeah.
particularly when you think alcohol, caffeine, medications, all those things that it has to deal with first. So for a lot of us, we're having sort of this not really detoxifying our estrogen kind of at the rate that we need to be detoxifying it. And then it has this opportunity. So there's two phases of detox in your liver, aptly named phase one and phase two liver detox, right? And say if you do hormone testing like the Dutch, it's actually going to show you how your estrogen is metabolizing through phase one and phase two, which is really cool, right? We can see how it's doing. So it's not just about how high your estrogen is, but it's what pathway is it metabolizing down. So there's a more protective pathway that we want the majority of the estrogen going down, and then there's two other pathways that are more connected to cancer and things like fibroids and ovarian cysts and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes the issue can be in phase one. Maybe you're not doing so well in phase one, and you need to upregulate that. And there's certain, things like a lot of people have heard of DIM is a good thing that can upregulate phase one. But you don't wanna just upregulate phase one if your phase two is not doing well, because then
Mm-hmm.
things can get stuck, right, and backed up, and that can cause some pain and and not feeling very well. So you wanna make sure your phase two, which is the methylation phase, is also doing really well, and this is where, like, B vitamins become very important. This is where glutathione, which is the master antioxidant, is super important. Calcium D-glucarate is also another thing that's helpful for phase two. So looking at really supporting your liver like on a daily basis. So I tell all of my clients, like, I think it's actually maybe the most important thing for your hormone health. I really
Mm-hmm.
do.
Yeah.
And so there's lots of good foods that you can eat. Beets are super, super good for both your liver and your gallbladder. Lemon, and I do like lemon in warm water with a pinch of salt first thing in the morning. Cruciferous vegetables, which is where DIM comes from. So
Mm-hmm.
things like broccoli sprouts, broccoli sprouts are actually very high in DIM. Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, kale, all those kinds of vegetables are really good. But depending on what's going on with you, a lot of women will need some extra supplementation support. And what happens is once you start processing that estrogen better, and you're, getting it through your liver, it's basically going through that bile that I talked about earlier. Bile is, what's produced in the liver and the gallbladder to help break down fats. It's also our like engine or like the bus that takes the toxins out of the body via the colon. Right. And so this is another place that gut health becomes really important, because if your microbiome is messed up in your colon, your liver's done all the hard work of detoxifying estrogen, but then it gets in the colon. If things are messed up, it can actually do what we call is it's deconjugated. So
Mm-hmm.
basically, like, the estrogen has been made water soluble and really not harmful to you anymore. But then with this bacteria being off base in your intestines, it can break that back off. Estrogen recycles in your body, goes back up to have to be detoxified by your liver again.
Wow. I
Yeah,
didn't realize that.
yeah,
That's crazy.
yeah. And actually, there's a whole subset of your microbiome called the estrobolome, and this
Mm-hmm.
is specifically, the part that works on that detoxifying of estrogen and moving it out of your body. So you
Right.
can start to see how it's all interconnected.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And when you were talking earlier about the test, the Dutch test
Hmm.
you mentioned, what's
Hmm.
your perspective on taking a look at hormones if someone is interested in getting testing done?
Hmm.
Is it the Dutch test? Is it a saliva based test? Dutch test is dried urine for those of you that
Hmm.
aren't familiar, and you don't have to go too far into that,
Yeah.
but I can hear listeners maybe wondering, like, well, what kind of hormone test would I get if I want to pursue taking a look at what's going on with me?
Yeah, so it depends, honestly.
Mhm.
Um, So I utilize the Dutch, and then I utilize a saliva hormone panel called
Mm-hmm.
the EFHP. And it really kind of depends on what's going on with the person.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll just go some quick pros, cons. So pros of the Dutch is that you're going to get all those metabolites of all of your hormones, which is super helpful information.
So you'll see the
You're going to
process, right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
especially with estrogen. Like if
Mm-hmm.
I see somebody, say, for example, with fibroids or ovarian cysts, I want to see how their estrogen is metabolizing. And then it also goes into 4-point cortisol tests. So you can really see how your cortisol is, looking throughout the day, which is telling us how your adrenals are functioning. And that's an underlying thing to your sex hormones, right? We need to get those adrenals happy before your sex hormones are going to like work themselves out.
Mm-hmm.
And it also has what's called a kind of a small oats test, which is an organic acid test. So it tells us how your B12 is doing, your B6, dopamine, a few other things, melatonin, and that can be very helpful. And it's actually much more exact than a serum test would be, particularly with B12. Like I don't even look at B12 serum tests.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so those are pros. The most typical one that people use is the Dutch Complete, which is just a 1-day test, right? So basically, you're getting a snapshot on day 20 or 21 of your period, or excuse me, of your cycle. And that's very helpful, but there may be things going on, in the earlier part of your cycle or even after that. Like I've seen, for example, progesterone is supposed to peak. Uh, it's supposed to get to its highest point around day 20, 21, but then kind of stay up there and then drop right before your period starts about 2 days beforehand. For a lot of women, it'll look good on day 20 or 21, but then it drops way
Mm-hmm.
too early, right? So you're not
Mm-hmm.
going to see that with a 1-day test. So
Mm.
in the cases where women are skipping their periods, in perimenopause, that kind of thing, sometimes I prefer to do the saliva cycling test. And so that's a test that is done over the month, and you take 11
Mm.
samples. And so we can really see how your estrogen is working in the first half, how your progesterone is working in the second half. And it also looks at FSH, which is important for, stimulating your hormones too. So the follicle stimulating. So, it really depends. Menopause, Dutch 100%. Because, your hormones stay the same kind of throughout the month.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you get a lot with that test, it sounds like, with the Dutch
Yes.
Complete.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So, and Dutch does have a cycling panel, but it doesn't have all of the information that the saliva one does. And there are some issues possibly with the metabolites, because Dutch uses the metabolites to determine your progesterone levels. So some people say it's not as accurate as saliva.
Mm.
It's close enough, so
Yeah.
honestly, either is going to give you a lot of good information. So, I just it depends on what the client needs in terms of what I recommend for them
Yeah.
to take.
That's super helpful. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks for sharing that.
sure.
So, and you talked about the adrenals being like really the first kind of thing to look at with all
Hmm.
of that. Would you say that
Hmm.
that's true? Because if
Hmm.
those aren't in good function, then
Yeah.
you're going to really have a challenge with the hormones. So, how the gut, liver, and adrenals impact the hormones. Is there anything else that you would add about the adrenals in that whole picture?
I mean, so the biggest thing about adrenal function, is I know a lot of people are like, okay, tell me what like supplement I need to take to help my adrenals, or tell me what adaptogen if they, know something about it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, they're great and they're super helpful and often people need them, but you have to change your lifestyle in
Hmm.
order to support your adrenals, right? And it like you can't supplement your way out of high or low cortisol. Like it just isn't going to happen. And so this is always the kicker, I think, that's hard for, a lot of women, because we're so busy and it's just like, well, just give me something I can take to make this better. And I'm like, you literally have to change your busy life. Like
You literally have to do something less instead of add something to
exactly,
it.
exactly,
Yeah, and of course I know this firsthand, as
Yes.
listeners might know, and as we talked about on your podcast some. But
Mhm.
yeah, that's very true, and it is challenging because especially when you are a very driven person, you have
Mhm.
a lot of energy when you're at your best.
Yep.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we can definitely get caught in these cycles of, that I see it all the time on the tests. Like high cortisol at certain times of the day and then low cortisol
Mm,
at other times of the day, but not the places that they're supposed to
not
be.
when they
It's
need to
like
be. Yeah.
it's the opposite of what it needs to be at that time of the day. And so, until you get really, I mean, it's about your circadian rhythm, that this cortisol follows. And once you get that, I mean, sometimes that in and of itself will take care of sex hormone imbalances.
Hmm.
But for sure, you can't balance out the sex hormones without working on the adrenals. Like it's
Without
just,
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And it is like looking at that rhythm, like you
Mhm.
said, of how you might feel at different times throughout the day, how the cortisol might be in connection.
Mhm.
Cause we should feel awake and ready to rise and get out of bed in the morning and
Yeah,
not dragging. And we should feel like we're ready to go to sleep and wind down at night. And
yeah,
I know that can feel flip flopped when you're having
yeah.
adrenal issues. You can feel lethargic in the morning, like I just want to sleep more. You might need a nap in the afternoon. And then at nighttime, it's this tired but wired feeling that I described it
Absolutely.
as. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I would say that's 85 to 90% of what I see with women, like that
Yeah.
exact cycle. So
Yeah.
it really is like flipping it on its head. Like, we got to figure out how to get you into bed and, asleep and sleeping through the night. And then it's going to impact your mornings. You're going to feel better in the morning.
Mhm.
And there's definitely, some things that you can do to support that, like wake up in the morning to get your body on that path, right? So
Mhm.
that it'll do it on its own. But yeah, I mean, until that switches, nothing else is going to work.
Right. Have you found that you needed to change anything about your lifestyle and the way you do things personally to either avoid or get yourself and your adrenal health back?
Oh yeah. I mean,
What was one thing that you feel like was a big difference for you?
so I'd say the biggest thing for me in dealing with adrenal stuff for years, like I had
Hmm.
adrenal quote unquote fatigue,
Right.
diagnosed in my 20s. But post all of my surgeries, the boundary setting is key, right?
Hmm.
And like even I know people will talk a lot about boundaries these days, and like saying no and those kinds of things, but I find it's almost harder to say no to yourself sometimes. Like you can kind of push yourself to say like, okay, I'm not going to do this for someone else, but then like you whatever kind of drive you have,
Hmm.
you want to keep going. And I've really had to, like, if my body, I'm really tuned into how my body is feeling now. And if I'm notice myself pushing through something, I'm like, stop,
Hmm.
go take a walk, go meditate, go do something else for, I don't care if it's like, sometimes it has to be for like 3 or 4 hours,
Hmm.
and I know not everybody has that option,
Yeah.
but, to really pay attention to those signals and keep those boundaries with yourself, because that's where I think the most stress actually comes from, is that like internal thing that we have going on.
Yeah, that's so important.
Yeah.
And it kind of leads into my next question, which is one of the questions that I ask everyone in the Wild Femme episodes,
Hmm.
which is, do you have a cycle or a rhythm of sorts that you anchor to, whether that's inner or outer, seasonal, cyclical, phases, lunar, any cycles or rhythms?
Well, I definitely, as a hormone lady,
Hmm.
I definitely, pay very, very close attention to my own menstrual cycle.
Hmm.
In terms of I take my temperature every morning, and, mark it all down in my app and really
Hmm.
pay attention to any shifts in that. Because that, some people call your period the fifth vital sign, and so
Exactly.
that tells you so much about your health.
Hmm.
And so if that's off, I wonder, okay, well, what did I do differently, what's
Hmm.
going on? So that's really my anchor, I would say, in such a big way. And but just really following my body a lot more now too, and
Yeah.
respecting it, just respecting it. Yeah.
Yeah. And what's one thing that you do at least most days for your health?
Um, well, I definitely have my, particular supplements that I take on a daily basis. Post surgeries, they definitely kind of blew out my thyroid. And I
Mm,
was on thyroid meds for a little while because things got bad. And then I was able to get myself off of that. And so there's certain, supplements I absolutely have to take in order to make me function in my day, and keep that thyroid working well. I definitely try and either walk or hike, or I'm back into dancing again after I, took a little break post all my surgeries. But I was a dancer before all this went down, and so I've sort of refound my love for that. And just
Mhm.
moving, it makes such a huge difference in my day.
I love it. Yeah, that was my next question. Are you moving your body today? And what does that look like? Because I know it doesn't always look the same every day.
Yes,
That's what I
yes.
teach. But maybe yours does look more consistent, or you have kind of your, one or two things that you like to do. It sounds like you definitely have a couple favorites. But yeah, are you moving today? And what's that look like?
Yeah, so I'd say that things do shift for me sort of depending on my energy levels.
Yeah.
I do love hiking. I live in, Asheville, surrounded by the Blue Ridge Mountains, super lucky to have those. Even in winter, I like getting out and just hiking around. I do like, you know, doing different things in terms of, I mean, dancing for sure, but also some days just doing, some very minor strength training, doing Pilates, trying to get myself back into doing more yoga again. Cause it's amazing how you can feel when you stop stretching all the time.
Hmm.
I feel that tightness, and
Oh,
so I
yeah.
know how important that is. But yeah, I really do like to kind of do different things because otherwise I get bored too.
Yeah. Yeah. Variety is
Yeah.
key. That's for
Yep.
sure.
Yep. For sure.
And last question.
Mhm.
What does wild mean to you?
I think as a woman, we ultimately all have this wild aspect to us, and that can mean different things for different people. But like having the freedom to live our lives in the way that feeds our soul, I think is such a huge goal for me. And I kind of, after going through a near death experience, that became even more important to me. Like living life on my terms, living life where I feel the most freedom and
Hmm.
openness. So yeah, that's what kind of keeps me going.
I love how you put that into your words. Yeah. The freedom to do what you love.
Yeah,
Yeah, what brings you
absolutely.
joy.
Hmm.
Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you would love for anyone listening, watching to know about their hormone health, their gut health? Any last thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I think so many people have struggled with either gut stuff or hormone stuff for a long time and feel like they can't get better because they've, been to multiple doctors and done all these things. And I just want to let people know that there's always the possibility of healing. And healing
Mm,
looks different for everyone. So I'm not saying you're going to be like, you know, you're not going to be like this other person necessarily that is able to run a triath or do a triathlon or something like that, but like there is so much that can be done, if you sort of are able to work with the right people.
mhm.
That's why I love, utilizing testing so we can really see what's going on with you individually. And, I lost half my colon and 8 inches of small intestine. And I always tell people, if I can heal my gut, you can heal your gut. It is possible, so yeah.
That's perfect. Yeah. Such empowering words. I love
Yeah.
what you're sharing. I love that you're so much of a teacher, an educator as
Mhm.
well, just wanting people to understand their bodies better. That's
Absolutely.
so
Because then you're
important.
empowered, right? You're
Yeah.
empowered in that way.
Yeah.
So
You're not just taking what someone else is saying, you're applying it because we have that inner guidance, that intuition that
mhm.
also gives us information about what's going on. So when we take things that might be more like test based or objective based or practitioner and
Mhm.
that kind of guidance with our own knowing, I feel like that's really powerful. So
Absolutely. And the
yeah.
more that you work on all this stuff, the more you'll see your own body signals,
Yeah.
and you'll kind of, I mean, I can sometimes know like, oh, I can tell I'm a little low on magnesium, just how my body, responds. So that's what you start to do over time is really make those connections. And then things, then you can kind of take care of most stuff on your own, which is a
Yeah.
great place to be. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, I so
Yeah.
appreciate everything you shared and
Absolutely.
everything that you're doing. If someone wants to learn more about your work with you, listen to a podcast, where would they go?
Yeah. So go to my website, christinegarvin.com.
Mhm.
That's probably the easiest place to find all the information. I would love for you to listen to my podcast, Hormonally Speaking. I have lots of great guests on there, including Jenny. It's going to be on here soon. So, yeah, that's best place. And then you can always shoot me an email if you have any questions.
Perfect. And for everyone listening, watching, all the links that Christine mentioned and her website will be in the show notes linked here. So thank you again for being here. And thank you for those of you watching. And as I always say, until we chat again, go live your one wild life.
Bye.